brain neuroplasticity and pain. And the information resonated so deeply within me that, quite honestly, everything changed. And I spent 3 years working closely with them to learn as much as I could about brain neuroplasticity and its role in pain medicine.
All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the facial pain webinar series. The Facial Pain Association is a patient-supported nonprofit organization whose mission is to provide education and to support neuropathic facial pain patients. In order to aid and further support our mission, we have launched our webinar series. Tonight's webinar is presented by Ms. Jennifer Wagner. Jennifer is the Director of Pain Consultants of Oregon's Neuroplasticity program. She is also the Executive Director of the Western Pain Society, where she guides the agency's efforts to establish high professional standards for pain care providers and advance pain research and treatments. You may submit questions throughout the webinar tonight, and we will try and answer as many questions as we can during the webinar, and then we'll answer the remainder of the questions via email. Thank you for joining the Facial Pain Association's webinar series, and now I present to you Ms. Jennifer Wagner.
Thank you, Allie. I appreciate the warm welcome, and it's certainly my pleasure to speak with you tonight about something that is near and dear to my heart. So for the past 18 years, I have been involved in a variety of efforts to improve pain care. I have worked as a nurse, one-on-one with patients in hospitals and countless outpatient settings. I have sat with individuals and their family members and listened to their stories and the many, many ways that chronic pain has impacted their lives. Through my work with the Pain Society of Oregon and the Western Pain Society, we have educated thousands of healthcare professionals about multidisciplinary pain management. And then about 10 years ago, I switched gears and threw myself into pain policy, believing that much of the frustration I was feeling stemmed from a failure of our systems, our healthcare system, our insurance system, our educational system. As the pain management coordinator in the governor's office, I advocated daily for improvements in these systems. I met with and lectured to addiction experts, child welfare experts, insurance representatives, policymakers, educators, and legislators. My work has grown from a local level to a regional level and now to a national level. And just when I thought I'd comfortably settled into my life's work, I heard Drs. Michael Moskowitz and Marla Golden give a lecture on brain neuroplasticity and pain. And the information resonated so deeply within me that, quite honestly, everything changed. And I spent 3 years working closely with them to learn as much as I could about brain neuroplasticity and its role in pain medicine. And now I split my time between administrative duties and patient care, offering neuroplasticity to patients 2 days a week. Tonight, you will learn that I am calling for a paradigm shift in pain management. And to do this, I believe we must start by thinking about beliefs. Now, our beliefs are some of the most important experiences we have. Our beliefs determine how we see ourselves and the world. Now, my patients tell me what they believe. They tell me that they believe that the pain will always be there, and at best, it is manageable. That normal activities of life cause long-lasting pain. That their abilities are limited by their pain. That they are permanently damaged, and that their pain is located in their body. Many of them believe that there are no treatment options available to them other than medication, and most believe that they will never be without pain. And unfortunately, we tell them that they are right. It is critical to understand that what we think becomes what we believe, and what we believe becomes our reality. And the reason this is true is because our brain is so capable that it makes this happen. If we can harness our own beliefs, we can redirect our efforts and our energy to change our situation. And if we remember that our brain and our body are one thing, and that each has a profound effect upon the other, then we can begin to imagine the possibility that things can change. And as these changes begin, this reinforces the power of our beliefs to make more changes and encourages us to use our beliefs to expand our ideas with endless possibilities. We recognize that our only real limitations are what we're willing to believe is possible. Now, the experience of being human irrefutably reinforces this concept. Time after time, we see people accomplish things that are thought to be impossible. If we looked at what is accepted as achievable today, compared to even 60 years ago, this would include television, passenger jets, antibiotics, computers, air conditioning, the polio vaccine, electric cars, and the very idea of neuroplasticity. None of these ideas and inventions came to existence spontaneously. They came from one person believing that they were not limited by their experiences to date, and that if they could think of something new, they could make it happen. A revolution has been sweeping the field of neuroscience, and it has resulted in a complete reversal of ideas long held sacred. Neuroplasticity, the way the nervous system changes during our lives, is a true and constant reality. In fact, the idea of the brain not changing every moment of life, from the appearance of a person's first brain cell in the womb until the day that person draws their last breath, is foolishness. Nowhere is this concept of brain neuroplasticity more important to consider than in the field of pain medicine. Here we have been documenting change in the central nervous system for over 50 years. Much of the research has been focused upon the spinal cord, but since the publication of Ron Melzack and Patrick Wall's pivotal paper on the gate theory of pain, we have developed solid research to show that neuroplasticity not only is a reality of the entire nervous system, but is also the underlying distinction and cause of chronic pain. Recent imaging technique advances allow us to use the MRI of the brain to show actual regional changes in activity, loss and misconnection of circuits, release of specific neurotransmitters, and the ability to compare composite pictures of the brains of those in pain to those without pain. Now, if we were to have an owner's manual for our brain, it would be these two books. So if you're very interested in neuroplasticity and you want a good place to start, then I recommend these. The first, The Brain That Changes Itself by Dr. Norman Deutsch, really describes neuroplasticity. And his newest book, The Brain's Healing Way, if you had to pick one, I recommend it, just because it now includes information specific to pain management. In fact, the first chapter of this book highlights the good work of my mentors, Dr. Moskowitz and Dr. Golden. In its simplest definition, neuroplasticity is the ability to change our own brain. Now, our brain changes automatically, instantly, and efficiently in response to changes in our body. And we access our brain through our thoughts and beliefs, and through our senses of sight, sound, taste, and touch, through memories, movement, our relationships, and the culture in which we live. It also changes in response to injuries, disease, traumatic events, and stressful situations. And the process by which these changes take place is called neuroplasticity. Thus, the changes that we see can be positive or negative. Now, it's important to remember that the brain and the body are one thing. The brain and the body are not separated from each other for even a moment of our existence. Sensory input from the body informs the brain, and the brain adjusts the responses in the body 30 times a second over our entire life. Changing one part changes the whole. We have been neuroplastically altering our brains since the moment that they started forming. Our physical bodies interact with our world via the sensory information we experience, ranging from vibration to movement to touch to vision. We see, hear sounds, sense vibration, smell, and touch. The more we are stimulated, the more nerve cells connect to each other, forming networks of nerve cells that become established electrical circuits, all based upon input from our bodies. Ultimately, we will form 1,000 trillion connections in the brain known as synapses. The brain itself is highly dependent upon energy and utilizes 20% of the body's energy. Now, this is remarkable if you consider that it usually makes up no more than 1.5 to 2% of the body's total weight. The dance between the brain and the body and the brain, is an exquisite study in challenge and change, each moving with the other's rhythm, adapting to shifting energy, coordinating timing, flowing effortlessly throughout our lives until something disrupts the process, pushing us to maladaptation. Now, our first wiring is typically in the arms of a loved one. And we are born with a largely disconnected nervous system. We will take roughly the next 25 years or so developing our connections, and then the rest of our lives continuing to make and break synapses every week. It is in this first 3 years that the brain is the most plastic, with estimates of 3 to 4 times the astonishing plasticity of the adult brain. Children are wired and develop new brain cells by the sensory input they receive from their surrounding environment. Now, initially, infants cry when they are hungry or uncomfortable or frightened. And their mothers, their fathers, their grandparents touch, feed, rock, nuzzle, sometimes sing and speak softly to them. They look them in the eye and hold them close, all in the service of soothing and loving them. And it is this loving touch that starts our process of learning to connect up our brains internally. The joy experienced by children as they grow is that of being soothed and stimulated at the same time. Everything is new, and early experiences help the child learn to self-soothe with the expectation that when things are frightening or threatening, help, protection, and love is on the way. Now, physiologically, the brain reads the body and tells it what it needs, and then it adjusts, making an astonishingly adaptive brain-body loop. And this requires orchestration of energy, nerves, muscles, bones, organs, and our connective tissue. And importantly, I want you to consider that throughout our lives, our physical and our emotional perception of ourselves is constantly changing. Now, there are 2 basic rules of neuroplasticity, and these principles are the reason that our brains change with repetitive stimulation. The first rule is what gets fired gets wired. So continued firing of a nerve by another nerve increases the strength of the firing and the number of synapses dedicated to those nerves. So I want you to think about anything that you've ever mastered in your life, whether it was riding a bike, learning to read, playing a musical instrument, or learning a new song. We tell our kids, and we do it ourselves, practice, practice, practice. So ask yourself, how many years has your brain been practicing being in pain? And even equally important, what messages are you saying to yourself over and over and over? The second rule of neuroplasticity is what you don't use, you lose. So nerve cells that do not fire other nerve cells over time lose their synaptic strength and break synapses dedicated to those nerves. So in a practical example, my patients will tell me all the time, Jen, I used to be really great at math, and then my 15-year-old brought home his homework, and for the life of me, I couldn't figure out how to do it. That's because you haven't been doing it. Now, we have identified 16 places in the brain where pain signaling is received. 9 of these places are in the conscious part of the brain, the cerebral cortex. And in these 9 places, only 5% of the nerve cells are normally dedicated to pain processing. So acute pain is an alarm going off in the brain, and it signifies danger and or damage to the body. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the brain doesn't just read the changes in the body. It reacts and directs the body to make adjustments. So when there's an injury or an illness, the brain responds by the firing of nerves in the pain pathway and then locates that pain as close as it can to the area of injury or illness. It may activate other parts of the involuntary and voluntary nervous system to do things such as speed up our heart rate, vocalize discomfort, initiate movement, to touch or avoid touching the painful area. And under this circumstance, the brain works to dampen the pain and often the pain will stop even before the tissues are fully healed. But in chronic pain, it's an entirely different story. The brain perceives ongoing danger, and the pain pathways are reinforced instead of inhibited. The pain response is enhanced in the brain, the spinal cord, and the peripheral tissue. The brain is learning pain. These processes are reinforced with the continued signaling from the periphery to the brain and the brain back to the periphery. Remember, what gets fired gets wired, so new synapses form. The brain sends signals back to the body based upon that excessive input to protect from further damage, even though there is no further damage. And the body responds to this by sending stronger pain signals back to the brain. And this can increase from a resting pace of once every 3 seconds to an activated rate of 50 times a second. And as this goes on, the nerve cells in the pain pathways begin to fire on their own, with or without any further input from the body. Nerve endings release up to 5 times the amount of pain molecules known as neurotransmitters. The most common of this is substance P, which is involved in pain, anxiety, nausea, depression, and inflammation. A vicious cycle is established. In this case, neuroplasticity works against us. In the brain, more brain cells are being recruited to sense pain, and pain transforms from being a symptom to being a disease. And we begin to perceive pain as relentless and constant. Like a runaway train, this process continues in a constant feedback loop to keep itself going. In chronic pain, the constant firing and wiring leads to an increase. Now remember, from 5% of nerve cells being dedicated to pain to as large as 15 to 25%. And once the brain has changed, and in turn the body has changed with it, energy is actually supplied to maintain this new balance, even if those changes are problematic for the person in pain. This is how all living systems work. So when the brain map expands, when we go from 5 to 15 to 25%, it has to steal cells and synapses from other functions, making them less reliable. And guess where it steals from? The areas that are responsible for planning, problem solving, conflict resolution, emotional regulation, and concentration. Now this is an important point. Everyone on this call has probably experienced this. As this stealing from other functions occur, people with chronic pain suffer significant losses, most important of which is their ability to self-soothe. Because these functions are being compromised, they have trouble with memory, planning, and initiating things. Patients have told me over and over again, I just don't think like I used to. And this doesn't just affect them in practical ways, such as being able to balance their checkbook or find their keys or remember why they got up and went into the room in the first place, but also in remembering and initiating the things that soothe them, the things that bring them joy, peace, calm, and happiness. When the body is ramped up, when your pain is at its worst and when you need it the most, your ability to soothe is compromised. Therefore, many people are left feeling isolated, worried, and often out of touch with the world around them. So I told you earlier that I was calling for a paradigm shift, but before we get there, we actually have to back up and have a patient shift and a provider shift. Now, the old model of pain management, and I think in many places this is still the current model, it eliminates the patient as someone who might have ideas and input into what can be done to help. Patients are encouraged to have limited expectations regarding their pain relief. Pain management is something that practitioners provide to patients. And I think of it like when people drop their car off at the mechanic. They pick it up after it's been fixed. And despite all of our commitment and talk about multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary care, the truth is that it is actually a rarity. We continue to have body workers and mind workers, and our care is often fragmented with everyone in their own niches, rarely connecting the dots. But what we know is that for pain care to be effective, It must be self-directed with the guidance of a host of professionals. And ultimately, the person with pain has to become the leader of their treatment team, assessing the situation, determining their needs, setting goals, and then finding the people with the expertise to help them achieve those goals and taking the steps necessary to change their situation. Now let's talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of how to use neuroplasticity. And I'm going to go over the key principles of intentional brain change, and then we'll spend some time discussing neuroplastic tools that you can start using right now. This next part, I want you to think of it as the heart of neuroplasticity. So we must start with a clear intention, and our intention is this. Pain management is not the goal of treating chronic pain. We can work toward a reasonable expectation of curing the disease of persistent pain. And to do this work effectively, motivation is essential. And I tell clinicians and patients right up front that it is not uncommon to stumble or to have early successes followed by periods of worsened pain that are resistant to this approach of reversing neuroplasticity. The best analogy I can think of is this. Remember how it was to learn to read. None of us picked up a book and read after being taught the alphabet. It just doesn't happen like that. Learning to read takes a lot of patience, practice, and repetition. We have to understand the rules, pronunciation, sentence structure, and comprehension involved in becoming a reader. But once we do, we cross that threshold. We go from learning to reading, and the world opens up to us in ways that we could never have imagined. Our brains are changed forever. And the same principle is an essential part of all the ways of using the brain to change itself. Becoming proficient may take weeks and even months. And I'll tell you more about that in a minute. But the very process of trying activates brain functions that have been diminished by excessive pain processing. This is where you start to take back some of those stolen areas. The intention is to change the brain and the body back to the way it used to function without pain. Relentlessness is a simple concept that is at the core of this technique, but as simple as it might be, it requires that no pain flare be allowed to pass without opposition to it. My patients are asked to develop 20 to 25 strategies for doing this. And remember, we access our brains through our senses, so sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. Our 15 to 20 strategies will involve those areas. Reliability means that we can rely upon our brain to restore and maintain normal function, but we must give it clear and unrelenting direction to do so. Now, one of the most important concepts on the road to transformation back to normal function is that of seeing pain episodes as an opportunity rather than a torment. And my patients say to me, you know, easy for you to say, Jen, but I work with them to see it this way. Instead of feeling pain and thinking this is just an inevitable part of my life, instead I want you to try and view pain as an alarm, telling you to do something. Get up, get your list, start working on it. The persistent signaling that previously led to anxiety and depression now presents an opportunity in healing. In many ways, this is an ideal situation to affect change in the brain and the body. This is our chance to turn the disease of pain back into a symptom. And this opportunity to decrease pain in the moment is sometimes successful and sometimes it's not. And I can't emphasize this part enough. The very act of applying these techniques to stem the rising tide of pain activates brain functions that have been stolen for pain processing. Hence, the immediate outcome of blocking the pain is far less important than the effort to disconnect those expanded pain networks. This really is one of the situations where you get an A for effort. And ultimately, we are looking for restoration. The first thing restored is a sense of hope. And if we believe that there are alternatives to a life of suffering with pain, the hopelessness of an unrelenting, painful existence is undermined. Improved hope allows us to reshape our beliefs, and the ability to hope to restore normal brain function should not be underestimated. When hope is restored, the area of pain tends to pull back to the areas corresponding more accurately to the injury. Pain-free periods begin to occur. These become more frequent, and the person with persistent pain begins to experience a string of successes in suppressing the flares of pain with increasing efficiency, and hope continues to build. A new cycle takes hold. Restoration of normal brain and body function requires dedication to the relentless intention to return the brain to normal function. Here are the challenges to maintain hope, to push forward and go beyond restoration of brain and body function to restoration of the life you had before you had persistent pain. Before we talk about strategies, I want to spend just a few moments talking about our early childhood experiences as they relate to self-soothing and self-care. And I want you to reflect on two things. The first is I want you just to think back. I want you to think back and think about your parents or whoever it is that raised you. And how did they cope with stress? Normal everyday stress. The brakes went out in their car. They had a coworker or a boss they didn't like. Bills were mounting. Whatever the issue was. What was their go-to? How did they handle stress? Because we know that as a child you were watching that like a sponge. Very important messages were being sent to you about that. I also want you to consider what messages you were being sent about self-care and soothing. My patients often told me that they were told things like quit being a baby, to buck up. We tend to be a society that values youth and productivity. The second thing I want you to do is reflect on yourself. So how have you historically coped with some of these same everyday stressors? In the United States, we tend to cope by drinking, by smoking, by eating. We watch TV, we play video games, we spend hours on the internet, or we use social media. And unfortunately, sometimes we do things like kick our dog or hurt our spouse. All of these are ways that we are soothing ourselves. This is important because every single one of us has these everyday stressors coming at us. But for people living with chronic pain, it's considerably worse because pain by its very nature demands soothing. So now, more than ever, you need good strategies for coping and for self-soothing. And I ask you to be gentle with yourselves. You can't do what you don't know. The good news is that you can learn healthy ways to cope with stress and chronic pain. So let's talk about some strategies. My patients complete a worksheet titled The List of 25 because when they're finished with it, they will have roughly 20 to 25 neuroplastic tools for managing their pain. The point of this list is to be creative. This is a very unique process. What works for one person won't necessarily work for the other. You must think of 3 to 5 things in each category that either soothe you, so these are when your pain's at its worst, or brings you joy and pleasure, and those are for your good days. So we're going to do this by starting with the current versus goal worksheet. What the purpose of this goal is that I ask my patients to take an honest look at where they're at and all the ways that their pain is impacting them. So they imagine an average week in their life, not when they have people visiting or they're doing a home improvement project, just regular ho-hum week for you. And you write down everything that you consistently spend your time on. And this is where people will tend to struggle with it or cry because they'll look at the list and they'll see that it only has 3 or 4 things on it. And that over time, pain has just narrowed their existence. Their life has become much smaller. And even though they're living it every day, there's something about seeing it that's incredibly challenging. And the second part of the worksheet is that we ask people to muster as much faith that they possibly can that neuroplasticity is going to considerably decrease their pain. And if so, how would their life be different? How would they spend their time, their energy, their money, their passions? What would their life look like if they didn't have chronic pain? And they bring it in. The second thing we do is we start thinking about our thoughts and our beliefs. And so I have patients write down what they believe, not only about their chronic pain, but what they believe about their health in general. And then the second part of it is to ask yourself, why do you believe that? Is it because you've experienced it? Were you taught it by a physician? Do you still believe that that physician is credible? Essentially to question the validity of your belief. And we talk about how beliefs are on a spectrum. So religion is a perfect example here. People tend to hold very tightly to what they believe in their religion. So that's one end of the spectrum. And then at the other end, we think about all the things we talked about earlier in this presentation, about airplanes flying in the air and the polio vaccine, about all of us having smartphones and electric cars. And we decide if our beliefs about our pain and our health are where they fall on that spectrum. And is it a belief we're going to hold tight to, or is it something that we can start to loosen the grip on a little bit and consider that things could be different? And the same goes for our thoughts. So when you're at home and your pain is high, what is it that runs through your mind? What is it, if you think of it like a song that you're learning, what are you saying over and over and over? And we change the messages, and you'll see here on a slide are just some examples of changing messages that patients have brought in for me. And then we switch to the senses, so sight. The most common things that people put on their list of 25 are pictures of their kids or their grandkids, but I also get a lot of nature, so rivers, mountains, sunsets, garden art. The point is that when you look at it, does it bring you joy and pleasure? Does it soothe you? Sound is another valuable tool. People tend to go with the music that they've listened to their whole life, but I'll encourage them to kind of come out of the box some and consider different types of music. And with Spotify and Pandora and different apps out there, there's a number of ways that we can access music for free. And so I ask my patients to explore, to listen to bluegrass or heavy metal, jazz, things that they wouldn't normally listen to experiment with chanting, vibration. Sometimes they'll have their loved ones who live far away record their grandchildren or their children's voices, giggling babies, and send it to them. There's a lot of wonderful things we can do with sound. I am unable to move my slides.
Jen, I'm not sure why you can't move your slides. If you would just...
There you go. I think I just got it. Here we go. Can you all see the movement slide? There we go. So movement, I think, is a common thing we talk with people about. The more and more we heard, the tendency is to get very still and to stop moving. And so we encourage our patients to consider exercise in a warm water pool, to try dancing, even if you have to adapt it considerably. And Tai Chi are just examples of good ways that we can move. Touch is really powerful. Depending on what your financial resources are, we always encourage our patients to consider different types of body work. But I'd say the most common one, my patients will go into a fabric store and they will spend an hour or so just going through touching different types of fabric and picking their favorites out. They'll buy just small pieces of it and hook it on a hook, you know, one of those silver loops, and keep it with them. Stones are another example. Petting pets, blankets, all kinds of things come into play here. I ask you to consider human touch and the value of it. We know that when we look at it on the MRI, functional MRIs, it's a powerful, powerful tool. So hugging and taking the elephant out of the room and talking about us so we can engage in sex and intimate touch is also very important. Smell. So I think the most common ones are lavender, vanilla, lemon, and peppermint. There's a lot of ways to consider this. People will bring in, their grandpa's tobacco, old colognes. The point is that you ask yourself if it's soothing and brings you joy and pleasure. Taste, the most common ones people start out with are chocolate. I see a lot of popcorn, root beer. Favorite recipes, people will write down grandma's pie, that type of thing, and then we have some fun with them, hunting up the recipes and then recreating them in their homes. I think the important part to touch here is that it's not really permission to sit and eat an entire bag of chocolate. The point is that you be very present with it. You taste the chocolate. You know why it made it to your list of 25. Is it that it's salty, caramely, smooth? What is the thing about it that makes you like it? Sit there and enjoy it. We have our patients develop a pleasure pack, particularly if they're going to go into surgery or a procedure, or if they sort of consistently know when they're going to get pain flares. Then we, on the good days, have them design these packs and put them next to their bed, next to recliner, where they're going to be and be able to access them when their pain is at their worst. Instead of going on treasure hunts, we ask our patients to go on pleasure hunts. We force them to come in and tell us a joke every time they come for a visit. It's important to remember to laugh as much as possible. And I think this last thing here on the slide can't be emphasized enough. The act of volunteering or helping another, sort of these random acts of kindness, are profoundly powerful. And if you haven't done it, I encourage you to get back in it and try to do so again. Memories are important, and I ask you to consider if there's any negative memories in your life. You'll know that if you think about it, it can have a profound effect on you physically. Your heart will speed up, people will get clammy, their palms will sweat. The same thing can happen, though, in the reverse. And if you can think of a time where you felt happy, joy, pleasure, soothed, warm, safe, all those type of things, it can have the exact effect on your body in terms of slowing your heart rate and calming you down and bringing you joy and pleasure. The important part here is that you should make this memory as rich as you possibly can. So I have my patients write it down and then kind of keep it out. And over the course of a week, things will come back to them that they hadn't remembered initially, and they'll continue to add to it and make the memory as rich and full as they possibly can. And think of your senses. So as you're remembering this particular day in your life, think about, was it in the morning? Was it in the afternoon? Was the sun hot and above you? Was it rainy, cloudy? Was there anything you could feel? Was the wind blowing? Was there a smell or a taste involved with the memory? All of those things will help it be the most powerful it can be for your brain. The other part here is that our family members, our loved ones, and our friends are often at a loss as how to help when chronic pain is involved. And this is a great way. If you are struggling yourself to remember what you were like before you had chronic pain, involve your family and your friends. Make it an environment where they feel safe enough to talk to you about who you were and how you were before you had chronic pain. And then begin to remember and see yourself exactly that way. I work with my patients to understand when they're in their amygdala. And this is when you're in your extreme places where you have absolute anger, panic, sadness, fear, the ultimate of anxiety. This isn't a rainstorm, this is the hurricane. This is when it is in its most severe form. And these are the moments that we need to have learned breathing exercises and various relaxation techniques. Meditation, hypnosis, biofeedback, and prayer are the absolute things that we need to engage in to help us get out of our amygdalas and get back down into a calm place. And then the very last thing we work on are these two things, which are goals and flare planning. So I have all my patients establish short-term goals. Now these are things that can be accomplished in 3 to 6 months, and then long-term goals are 6 to 12 months. It's not just writing the goal down, but we go through an exercise where we anticipate the barriers to reaching that goal and then address how we're going to respond to those barriers so that we can ensure as much success as possible in terms of reaching the goal. And then flare planning is key. It's an inevitable fact for most patients that are having chronic pain that they're going to have flares, and what do we do about them, and what is our plan so that you know what to do. You're armed with a number of tools neuroplastically to just flood your brain so that we can nip that flare in the bud. We can have it be a shorter duration each time and hopefully stop the frequency of them. So this is what happens during the last part. Now, once we have the list of 25, I have my patients do something on it every 2 to 4 hours. And the absolute rule is never to go more than 4 hours without doing something on the list. And so if you imagine that, if you do that day in, day out, the list gets old pretty quick. And so it's a live list in the sense that you continually have to ask yourself if it's working. Does it still bring you joy and pleasure? Is it still soothing to you, or has it become sort of ho-hum? And if it has, you have to take it off the list, and you have to be creative and go back to the drawing board and think of something new and replace it. And oftentimes, after a period of weeks or a month, we can go back to it and add it back on the list. But it's a conscious process of making sure that it's still lighting your brain up, that you still feel the joy and pleasure and soothing from it. And then lastly, what I want to say is that one of the most important things to understand is that people living with persistent pain are not less than what they were in the past. They are more. And life requires the courage to keep pushing through the obstacles that are placed before us. Persistent pain is merely one of those obstacles. And living with this requires a courage that is unimaginable to those of us who do not have that type of pain. So Pema Trojan wrote, "From the very beginning to the very end, pointing to our own hearts to discover what is true isn't just a matter of honesty, but also of compassion and respect for what we see. We can make this journey together." And with that, I thank you for your time, and I welcome your questions.
All right, thank you very much, Jen. It was a great presentation. We do have a few questions for you. The first being, how can we find someone qualified to help you with neuroplasticity?
I wish I had a better answer for all of you about that. It's new and emerging, and there just aren't many clinicians trained in it across the country. I would start probably with your local psychologist or psychiatrist and ask them if they're familiar with brain neuroplasticity specific to pain, and go that route. There is no centralized resource book or a place that we can look to find people with training in it. It's really that new.
Okay. So you wouldn't say that there's a way for us to find someone local to help us with the accountability aspect, or would you say we should rely on our friends and family to help us?
I think that all of the above, Allie, all of the above. So you can start with a list of 25, writing down your thoughts, your beliefs, all those things that we covered in the presentation today. I think that it is important to share it with the people around you. You can get the Neuroplasticity Workbook. It is available, the one I use, on Amazon, and I'll send you all the link so that you can look at the book and go through it chapter by chapter and do the things in it. But the more people you tell, the more people you engage in this work, I think the better you'll be at being accountable, because you have people helping you. The team gets bigger.
Okay, awesome. Another question. I know we do have a lot of young patients on the call. So for patients who have had pain since they were younger, is it more difficult to change the brain if you have had pain for a longer period in life? Is there a connection with that?
Yeah, I do think so. I have patients, though, I don't see very many pediatric patients. I have a few. So the majority of my patients are adults, and I would say I have people that range from having pain for a year all the way up to people who've had chronic pain for 40 years. And I have seen just tremendous results in people across that range. So it's not like if you've had pain for a long time, this isn't going to work for you. It just means that that's wired in there stronger. And just, like riding a bike or learning a song, it's really there, and so you have to work extra hard to change the wiring.
Okay. Is there a specific amount of time that someone should wait to see the effects of practicing neuroplasticity? I know that may be a difficult question to answer because everyone's brain is different, but how long should people...
I think everyone will see it right away. You'll see some effects of it. The more you engage in joy and pleasure and soothing, it's immediate. What people get frustrated about is that they want to a long-lasting, strong change right out of the gate. And I guess my recommendation there is to be as patient as you can. You didn't get there overnight. You're not going to get out of it overnight. But you should see immediately, you should start to see and feel the differences in terms of your pain, your anxiety, your depression. It may only last for a short period of time, and then you kind of return to where you were, and you'll feel frustrated by that. But if you think about the constant nonstop wiring or firing of the pain signals, any moment that you stop that, even if it's for 10 minutes, is changing that pattern. And the more we can change it, the more frequently we can change it, the better we're going to get. So my patients that do the best, quite honestly, are the ones that are kind of feisty, who are ready to take it on, and they will engage in it anywhere from an hour every day to many hours every day, and turn it around the fastest. It's what you put in it is what you get out of it.
Okay, all right. That's good information. Thank you. Is there any specific, since a lot of our patients are facial pain patients, is there anything specific that you see work specific with neuropathic facial pain?
So I think my patients with trigeminal neuralgia or facial pain, have to, they know themselves the best, and so we've had to fiddle with the weather. So the hot sun, gusts of wind, doors opening, all kinds of things can cause increases in that type of pain. And so in the room, we'll talk about how to engage in that. What one person can touch and feel and do is going to be very different to the other. What I would say is that it's not specific to diagnosis. So I see patients with fibromyalgia, with migraine headaches, with facial pain like you all have, bad backs, all the whole gamut of pain conditions. It's all the brain that is processing it. So the point is to focus on what soothes you and what brings you joy and pleasure. And only you can answer that question. No one else can really do it for you. And to engage in those things with the frequency as possible. Just flood your brain with neuroplasticity. To just pleasure, soothe as much as you can. And I understand that people have kids and they have jobs and they have chores and responsibilities and all those things are there. The point is to interweave neuroplasticity into your life as much as you possibly can, to find, even for 5 minutes in the middle of the day, a way to stop, get your list out, and do something on it. Most of my patients will find time in their schedules where they can do a longer session. So for instance, I have a woman who told me she bought a house just because the view off her deck was so outstanding. But because her pain had gotten so bad, she was never actually going out on her deck. So she decided, even though sleep was so critical to her and it was hard for her to do this, she set her alarm 30 minutes early. She got up in the morning. She made her favorite tea. And when I asked her why she didn't make her favorite tea every day, she couldn't really tell me. But her favorite tea was honey and half. And then she had a wrap that had lavender in it, and she would heat it up in the microwave, and then she'd go out on her deck. So she was hitting her senses of her sight. She was seeing the thing that she loved. She was having the warmth of the wrap on her neck. She was smelling the lavender smell, and she was tasting the tea as she was putting it in her mouth. And she would spend 30 minutes doing that, just sort of flooding her brain and her senses with pleasure and soothing. But then, it hit the fan. She had kids to get up, get out to school. She had to get into work herself. And so she'd have to set an alarm on her phone. And at 10 o'clock, she'd take out her list and she'd do something on her list for 10 minutes. And then at noon, she'd do something. And then at 2, she'd do something. And then in the evening, she could do, a longer session again. Conversely, I have patients who don't have any kids at home and aren't working, who stay up because of their pain until 2 or 3 in the morning and then sleep till noon in the afternoon. So it's, you have to match it to your life and where you're at and find a way to work it in.
Okay. So off of that question, that's going to be our last question. If someone finds that they are getting stuck in their neuroplasticity treatment and what they were trying wasn't working, what would you recommend?
Well, I would recommend asking, so a few things. The first I would come home to would be a few things, Allie. I would think about what you're believing. So what are the messages that you're saying to yourself? And is it things like, I knew this neuroplasticity wasn't going to work for me, nothing works for me, I'm frustrated by this, what kind of thoughts are you having around it? And are you doing the list frequently? Are the things on your list things you put down, a month, 2 months ago, and not really bringing you joy and pleasure? Are you being creative? Are you mixing it up? I'd go to those things. I'd be gentle with myself also.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and thank you, Jennifer, for your wonderful presentation. Just a note to everyone, if we did not get to answer your questions, you can feel free to reach out to us via email, and we will get back to you. And also, please note that this webinar will be available to watch again on the Facial Pain website. All right, we thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you very much, Jennifer.
You're welcome. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.